gotta love these broads.
Yikes.
Oh wait,
Yeah,
I gotta turn my audio
women
on.
suck at mowing grass. Who has their wife mow grass? Does your wife mow grass?
Exactly. Listen, I shaved my beard until we get a holy pope. Came in nice and clean shaven. Everybody,
I'm always clean shaven outside of penitential seasons.
Can you even grow a beard? I'm questioning it. You look like the kind of guy who gets like a patchy beard if you try to grow it in, right?
I do have a patchy beard.
R.I.P.
Yeah, that's a curse some guys deal with.
But I'm a Latin. I don't have to care about that. I'm not a bizlarper.
So true. I'm gonna go shave my beard right now.
So true. This is why you're a rad trad, Nick. It's because you haven't shaved your beard. You shave your beard, you're gonna start, saying the litany of the the Holy Fathers of Vatican II and all the holy post-conciliar popes.
So true.
So
true.
I definitely want to talk to you guys. Like, we're gonna get into some stuff tonight. Some of the angles that I've been watching is I'm seeing all of the articles that are coming out, right? And the one that jumped out to me right off the bat was there was a New York Times article, and the New York Times set it up as Francis's legacy hangs in the balance, and there's conservative cardinals coming in talking about unity, but this unity is dangerous and they have to watch for it. And I see that, and I think right away that the New York Times is just deep state propaganda, right? So this is like, I just think this is intelligence agencies trying to influence the conclave. Like, if they use the New York Times for that in the secular world, why would you not assume they're going to do that in the ecclesial world?
Yeah. I mean, it's truly, I think, a historic moment. It's a historic conclave. I mean, I sent you the quote from Cardinal Arborelius. Cardinal Arborelius is a European cardinal. He's papabile. He's been a cardinal for a few years. And he's like, yeah, I know like maybe 20 to 30 of the cardinal electors. I'll have it figured out by next week. This is a cardinal elector who's like literally could become pope. And he just doesn't know anybody. It's definitely, you would be surprised how much, the cardinal electors are being influenced by things like what the New York Times says.
Absolutely. Sometimes the media is the only exposure these guys have to each other, right? So what's interesting is everybody kind of was like, why are they pushing the conclave off so far? Like, it was, you had Francis's funeral, and you're supposed to wait, I think, 15 days from his death or something, or 9 days from his death or something like that. But they pushed it off a little extra time. And my initial thought is just, well, yeah, these guys don't know each other. Like, the way Francis kind of operated was he didn't allow these guys to come to consistories so that they would all get to know each other and meet each other and hobnob and things like that. So you have all these cardinals, like the electorate is completely changed from the last conclave. It's like the last conclave, it was like 58% European. This time it's like 42%. And there's all these cardinals from like far off, like from Asia and from South America and all these things. And a lot of people think because Francis picked these guys that you're just going to get another guy in the mold of Francis. And I don't think that's the case. Like, Francis doesn't even know the guys he's picked. He's counting on his contacts in that country, and they're bringing these guys up. So it's an interesting thing that we're seeing. And then the Rorate Celli put out an article today just talking about how there's one thing that's noticeable is that the younger cardinals that Francis did elect are looking to the older guys, and the guys who are kind of veterans to this, who were around for Francis's election, are kind of like this older brother figure that they're all looking to for stability right now. Because as wild as it sounds, like, it seems like Francis's death was unexpected. Like, even though we saw he was sick for a while.
Yeah. I saw that as well. Some of the cardinals saying that this was shocking. I don't know how it was shocking. You had how old was he? 88-year-old man who just got over bronchitis with 1.5 lungs, and apparently the cardinals are just shocked that he passed away. But I think the point you brought up is important, and I think that this definitely bodes well. Although I'm neither a prophet nor the son of a prophet. I think we need to be clear that nobody knows who's going to be, what's going through the mind of the cardinals, or who's going to become pope. But we can say, we can highlight those external circumstances of what they seem to indicate. is somebody like Erdő, Cardinal Erdő from Hungary. He seems to be, from what I've seen, from what the Cardinals have expressed, he seems to be somebody who, we got to keep an eye out, because he's been conspicuously silent as well, which is more telling sometimes than actually speaking out.
So true. What was the percentage, Anthony, of Europeans? It was like 42.
So last time was 58%. This time is 42%. It's like 17% from South America. There's like 50.
It's like the U.S. consensus, man. What's going on? All of a
sudden.
I know.
What's interesting as well is that Erdő has friends in Africa. Like he's highly regarded in Africa, which those cardinals are kind of a like such a weird mixed bag to think about, because they're not in on the politicking, and I bet they could be very easily manipulated if because I'm sure you've read about how previous conclaves have went, and it's usually not as squeaky clean and free from politicking as the rules seemingly lay out. So I think that's something to consider.
Well, you sent me, this is a paragraph from that Roraticelli blog. Yesterday, we also received some tasty details from the General Congregation of Cardinals. The interventions of Cardinal Ike and Cardinal Robert Sarra were very well received. The former, with his doctrinal clarity and accurate diagnosis of the ecclesial situation in Europe. The latter, with a voice that, as always, combines spiritual strength with a verbal elegance that does not need to shout to convince. The good tone that prevails among the cardinals is also surprising. There is courtesy, there is listening, and despite the open wounds of recent years, there is a desire for unity. So what I wanted to just touch on is we've had this very strange thing. So you guys are both converts. Nick comes in 2020. You come in 2022.
Mm-hmm.
If we happen to get a Cardinal Sarra or an Ike or an Erdő, or even like I'm telling you, everybody was like throwing Pizzaballa out because of his goofy name and stuff, and they're talking about the Israel-Palestine stuff. But what's interesting about Pizzaballa is that because he's dealing with so much stuff on the ground, you don't know his actual positions on some of the more controversial stuff. Like he's just not a guy who's out there, loud with the voice with these cultural issues, which leads me to believe he's probably much more on the conservative side, just because I think a lot of these guys tended to just quiet down about this stuff to keep their head down. And I think he really did have a lot going on the ground with being the Patriarch of Jerusalem. Yeah. So, but what's interesting for you guys is you have never known a time where you are defending the Pope against the secular media. So what we've had for the past 12 years is the secular media raving about Francis, taking some things out of context to make it sound like he's saying something worse than he actually is at most times. Yeah. And a lot of especially for converts coming in, like you come in, you're excited to become Catholic, like you want to defend the Pope, and you find that you're defending the Pope against other Catholics. And that's got to be a very strange position to be in. Like neither of you ever lived through the days of Benedict and John Paul II, when Benedict gives that Regensburg address and the whole secular media comes after him, calling him Islamophobic and saying things like that. Like that's something you guys have never experienced, and there's a possibility you could.
Yeah, it's definitely surreal for me, because I went through a discernment process, obviously, before I converted. And a big part of that discernment process, a major part of what was keeping me from converting, was the sort of aura that Francis had of this is a liberal Pope, this is a progressive Pope, which is falsifying Roman Catholicism. So that was a big part in considering my own conversion. And then obviously my Catholicism since then has been it's very weird to phrase it, especially now that he's dead, but it's been protective of Francis, I guess you could say, because I understand coming from a point of somebody who is especially speaking back to the
Protestants and
yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, I want to communicate to them that things aren't as bad as you think. It doesn't mean that there's not problems. It just is. It's not something which is destroying or falsifying Catholicism. You can still come into the church, and that's something that I've needed to emphasize. But it would be really weird to have the actual it's
the actual most based pope ever, right?
Yes. Now that he's gone, we can admit that was a meme the whole time. We weren't serious about that, but yeah, it's I think that those are my thoughts on it. It's very bittersweet. It's very complicated, but I still love Pope Francis, but it's hard for me to lie to your face and say that I would want another 15 years.
Francis II. Like, come on, exactly. That's just crazy. That the thing that we're going to, I think something that's going to be interesting. Nick said this to me in the break in the green room was like there could be a way that it flips where the guys who were pope-splaining are now on the other side. But I don't think it'll happen like that, because I do think those guys, most of them, not all of them, most of them, I'm not talking about like Mike Lewis and stuff. Like, those guys are going to freak out if you get a conservative pope. But I think the other guys, like, I think generally their instinct was to just, guard their father's nakedness, or however you'd want to phrase it. So, but I do think if the next pope comes in, let's just hypothetically say a Sarra comes in and Sarra says, okay, we're getting rid of the gay blessings thing. Like, we're just getting rid of it. Like, he's from Africa. Like, African bishops came together. What if he just says, look, this is a confusing statement. We're gonna scrap this one. If he comes in and he starts, he completely loosens the restrictions on TC and brings it back to Summorum Pontificum, then, like, if please God, if something like this ever happened, let's say Cardinal Sarra celebrated a Latin mass as the Pope, like something like that. Now, if stuff like that starts happening, where you're seeing the Francis pontificate kind of get overturned and flipped and stuff like that, I do think those guys are going to have a very difficult time seeing that they spent the last 12 years defending positions that are just getting tossed out by the next guy.
You have to remember that, like, Cardinal Mueller, he's papabile. Cardinal Mueller, he has some degree of supporters. So Cardinal Mueller is not afraid to go out there and to even state that His Holiness has stated things which are heretical. And like, he came out the day after his death and had an interview where he made the comment of something like, nobody wants some old man, going around St. Peter's Square kissing babies. And this was like the day after Pope Francis died. I read that and I was like, that is definitely harsh. I don't think it was, proper to say something like that so near after His Holiness's death. But he's papabile. I mean, if he became Pope, I'm sure he would not shrink back from looking upon his predecessor as
problematic.
Yeah.
Well, people are saying this, like Sarra as a Novus Ordo, bro. 100%. All these guys are. Cardinal Mueller, like, you guys don't understand. Cardinal Mueller, that we see him now as like this arch conservative. He was a liberal before. So Christian posted something earlier today that was really interesting, and he said, I can't believe this channel became Seneca contest.
That's awesome.
You posted something earlier where you were pointing out how certain cardinal or certain bishops or cardinals, whatever they were, under Benedict, were like these super based, like, conservative guys, and then when Francis came in, it was like they completely flipped on all of their positions.
Yeah, it's like some of these
sounds
guys
like Congress.
Yeah, true. I mean, that's literally true. It's exactly like it. I mean, some of these guys, they're saying I've seen certain cardinals, and I've been reading their profiles, because I've read about probably like 50 or 60 of the profiles on the College of Cardinals website. Some of them are like, yeah, we can criminalize homosexual acts, and then like 3 years later, they're in, they're completely in on normalizing homosexuals, in sodomitical relationships, receiving the Eucharist, like crazy shifts like that over a span of a few years. And you have to ask yourself, what the heck happened? Like, what is going on here? Are these people basically just politicians playing to the whatever the popular winds are, and it's hard to say that they're anything but that, to be honest.
Yeah. Hey, let me ask you this. This is a really good question. So, like, hypothetically, I know it's pretty absurd to even think this is going to happen. Let's just say a bishop was elected who's not a cardinal and he's not present in Rome. I have no idea. How would that play out? Well, I don't think they can release the white smoke until the person agrees to be the pope.
Yeah.
So let's like say some crazy hypothetical. They pick Bishop Schneider or something, you know. It's like, you know,
Michael Lofton.
All three of us receive an immediate excommunication. That'd be
Joe Diodati.
I'm cooked.
Joe Diodati had a really good question too. I would say, wait, where's Joe's question? So yeah, like a public sin requires public repentance. So no, if you're like a public, like a politician who supports abortion, you can't just go to a priest and confess that. I think you have to publicly say, you know, I renounce my former position because of the public damage you did. Now it may be enough to get you to heaven, you know, but yeah, I would think to undo the public damage you caused. So, okay, wait, what was the other quote you sent me? It was the Swedish cardinal said that he hasn't. We talked about that, right? Like these guys literally don't know each other. It's really, like most of these guys have their information from the media and what they've seen in the media.
We have what we have now, and it was unfortunate that they weren't able to translate into Italian yet, although that doesn't really matter because most of the guys most of the global cardinals can speak English. But there is the College of Cardinals report website, which is this website is literally being used by cardinals, like in their research for the rest of the candidates. And if you read the profiles, like they are very much to the right. I mean, they're pro TLM. They are, obviously they hold to all the orthodox positions within the church. So that's going to be a very important resource as well, that I hope a lot of them go to that rather than just going to like weird traditional media stuff. But have you guys heard of the situation between Perilin and Zen?
Heard a little bit about it. Yeah.
I didn't know.
Oh, so this is like some deep
real quick. If you guys do send super chats in, I'm going to let Christian finish speaking and then I'll get to them after. So don't think I'm ignoring you. I'm going to highlight any super chats that come in. Any good questions that come in, just put a question mark and we'll get to them. But I don't want to interrupt him again.
Yeah. So when it comes to the Cardinal Zen versus Cardinal Perilin situation, so Cardinal Perilin, they had the Vatican China Accords. If you ever heard of that, basically China gets involved in the appointing of bishops in Catholic bishops in China. And obviously Cardinal Zen, he's been persecuted by the Chinese government. He's literally like on house arrest from the Chinese government. He's he's a living martyr right now, persecuted by the government. And Zen, like straight up, like went to the media and like called Perilin a liar. He's a liar. He's unscrupulous. He just like threw us to the dogs. Like he completely capitulated to the communists. And he's, I think, 93 years old. He's really old. And he wasn't able to travel at all, but the Chinese government let him have his passport back so he could travel for just this. So Cardinal Zen did like everything he could to travel to the Vatican. And now he's supposed to like go to the general congregation and like basically smack Perilin in the face in front of everyone and say like, you are a liar, you're unscrupulous. So Perilin, I definitely think that he's shaking in his boots right now, because with a lot of those global South and Asian cardinals, they don't really know as much about the interior politics or some of these major events. They're just dedicated to serving their own communities. Mm-hmm. But if he did that, I think that would be like a death blow. It would definitely
they're already like Perilin's trying to spread the rumor that he's got 50 votes already. Like that's how like messed up this guy is, and that is going to back. I don't think Perilin's even in the running, honestly. I think he'd be way too controversial. I really don't think they're looking for that, and I also think that the guys who went so the cardinals who lived through the John Paul II papacy and the Benedict papacy, I think that they kind of had this feeling that no matter who we put in, whether it's Bergoglio or anybody, like we're going to see a continuation of those two policies, which were essentially like, all right, liturgy's kind of up for grabs, but the doctrine cannot change. Like John Paul II was very clear on his Veritatis Splendor, and then Benedict came in. He was basically the head of the CDF during that pontificate. So I think they thought, well, the church is going to protect God will protect the church from error. And then when Francis comes in, I think all of those guys got shaken up, and they're going to be much more on their guard for a political pope this time. And I don't think any of them want that revolution to continue. And a lot of the conversations that are going on right now are very focused on, look, we need, I think these cardinals and bishops throughout the world, they have been shaken to their core by the faithful being so upset. Like, it's one thing to have the media mad at you because you're Catholic, but you could always, we're going to get into this in the after show, because I had a 2-hour 15-on-1 debate against my Lutheran in-laws, all against me, on Saturday. It was 2 hours long. And when I tell you we got into everything, it was, but this is basically like, these bishops are used to dealing with media and people like that coming and criticizing them because of their stance on gay unions or gay marriage and things like that. But they can always present the front and say, look, this is what the church teaches, like they could have their own nuanced approach to it, but this is what the church teaches. And that kind of all got, not that the teaching changed, but Francis kind of put these muddled statements out that made people think these teachings were up for grabs, and they're just not. So I think that these bishops and cardinals were really shaken by that. And I do think they want stability back, and they want their own faithful to love them.
Yeah. It kind of depends on, I think, and this is a question for you too, but like, if they were to put in my view, if they were to put in a, say, hypothetically, a Sarra or a Burke, that would be the Catholic equivalent to, like, it's 2016 election night, and we just forget Obama, just forget all of that. Basically,
1930s, but
yeah, there you go. It could be. It's that like ground shaking, right? It just absolutely freaks everybody out. But here's one reason I've been thinking, like, it wouldn't surprise me if Erdő is the candidate that they end up picking. And the reason for this is just because when you look at the whole panoply of candidates, they typically don't pick like a guy on the fringe, generally speaking. But the thing that we keep hearing over and over and over again is some type of unity pope, and also a pope that would be solid on doctrine. Now, I don't know if you guys watched the funeral of Pope Francis, but when you watched his funeral, there was so much Latin, there's Gregorian chant, there's polyphony. They were busting out all the old copes. They got rid of, I had a friend who sent me these photos. They got rid of the candlesticks that Pope Francis used on the high altar of St. Peter, and they put back in like the old golden ones from the Benedict era. So it's like, clearly
they missed the pomp and circumstance.
Catholicism,
man. It's
I saw all that, right?
Yeah.
The like, literally they didn't wait for his body to cool, and they were like pulling out the old cope. They were pulling out, the gold pectoral crosses again.
Well,
it was wild.
I have a friend who's he's kind of like a penitential hermit, like discerning hermit that's over in Rome right now. He goes to the Angelicum, so he's in St. Peter's fairly often, and he was informed that back in like the last few years, the Holy Father banned most, if not all, just any type of form of mass from taking place at the side altars, and the sacristans would have to come out, and they would have to stop people if they were just going to be going up to say mass, and it was just really, really awkward. So my thought is, it's like, okay, clearly there's a lot of people who want the pomp and circumstance. When you take that with the whole, we want a unity pope, but we don't want to go so far right as to just freak everybody out. I feel like Erdő or something like that would be the candidate, because he would be, at least in our view, like center right.
And they're also dealing with things like, so Francis tried to get away from this idea that the church is European, right? So he's electing all these cardinals from outside of Europe, but Catholicism and Europe are inseparable. Like the faith is Europe, and Europe is the faith. It's just, you do need a very European Bishop of Rome, because of what Europe is going through in particular right now, with all the immigration and all the problems they're facing. They're on the verge of losing the faith. Like, you really do need a a European pope for that reason. I mean, it would be crazy to have another South American pope or some pope from, Papua New Guinea or something. Like, it's crazy to freaking think like that.
I saw that there's like 2 cardinal electors from the Ivory Coast or something like that.
Yeah,
I read that and I was like, okay, that's kind of strange. If God blesses us with an Italian pope, it will be a wonderful year, because the Italians, they have a lot going for them. The papacy and Italians, it's like peanut butter and jelly.
Did you ever read what Benedict said about the papacy? Like, he talks about the diocese of Rome should have a bishop who's connected to the diocese of Rome. Like, and he really talks about how important it is that the church is Roman. It's like it's a very important thing. Before we move on, I do have to do the Recce and Celler ad. I'm horrible at this stuff. I gotta see if Rob left me like a banner or something. But Recce and Cellars is our sponsor, and they are amazing. So if you guys want to help support the show, just go to Recce and Cellars. They got a whole bunch of different wine. I just ordered 3 bottles for myself. If you use the code RESURREXIT, RESURREXIT, you will get 20% off. The wine is phenomenal. It's the best way to support our show. So I had to just get that done. And usually Rob's better at that stuff. I want to get to Andy's comment. Where the heck is it? Oh, man. Terrible. Mr. Wagner, your deeply felt reaction to Pope Francis's death tempered my reaction to act on the side of charity. Thank you for that.
I appreciate it.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, I listened to Father Charles Murr this morning, and he kind of got me off the black pill a little bit. Like, because I kind of have this, I kind of stand in the middle, the opposite of the middle. I don't want a moderate pope. I would rather a Cardinal Sarra or a Supich. Like, I don't want a moderate, because the church needs a cure right now. And I don't know if the church is ready for that cure. And it may need more, like, you will understand how deep the crisis is kind of, beating, until we actually understand that this is we're talking about the Catholic faith for all time. Like, we really do have a crisis on our hands, and it's not just about having a good pope. It's way deeper than that. It's about the foundations of the faith itself and how people are living that faith out, our whole understanding of living a penitential life. All these things kind of just are like, we're losing our Catholic identity by mixing too much with the Gentiles. It's kind of like Hellenistic Judaism got. It's like we're too mixed in with the atheist culture, and we need to kind of distinguish ourselves.
Well, I just don't really want a leftist. So
I agree. I'm glad to hear that.
It would be a nightmare. It would be a nightmare for me because
you're on Twitter.
I just don't even know how I would continue persuasively evangelizing. I guess I would need to change, not exactly change anything essential about what I believe, obviously, or the doctrinal principles, but change my approach for sure. Which would be, it would definitely put a damper on it. Although, under the Francis pontificate, we did have some of the largest gains in conversions to the church. So thank you, Pope Francis.
Well, I think what was interesting about Francis was he would always push to the boundary, but like not cross it. You know what I mean? Like, it was like, he kept flaunting the female deacon thing, but he never gave it to you. He would flaunt these things to make people think the church was going to do the thing. And then he, like the married priest thing, all of them, he brought you right to the precipice, and then he backed off. So I kind of think that is the Holy Spirit protecting it from going too far. So I don't know. Like you said, it'll be very difficult to evangelize under a pope like that. I think it was under Francis. But
yeah, it'd be rough. I mean, the reason I say this is, everyone keep my parents in your prayers. It's like my parents have gone from like anti-Catholic to like every once in a while going to the TLM with me, to like every once in a while, like even on their own, going to adoration, to now they're like reading Scott Hahn. So it's like very, very slow. But if we were to have like a Perilin come out or something like that, it would just like my parents, you gotta understand, it's like they're technically not baby boomers, but they're baby boomers. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And it's like these are, you know, Fox News conservative.
Yeah, my dad too, man.
And so I'm just like picture trying to like explain for another 15 years. So guys, what this really means is this.
Man,
you know?
it was so hard.
Yeah, we get Pizzaballa, and the Fox News conservatives have a different reason for hating us.
Exactly. I was like, I was trolling with people. I was like, watch.
Have you seen the Ick? Cardinal Ick, there was an article written about him. Like when he became a cardinal, when he became a bishop, there was like national like freak out all throughout the Netherlands. Like people hated him. They were like thinking of literally charging him with like hate crimes for the ways in which he talked about gay people. And then there's like another quote where it's like, yeah, and Cardinal Ick also purposefully downplayed the atrocities against the Jews that the Catholic Church has committed. And I'm like, okay, we're back. I think we're back. Yeah. Cardinal Ick is going to be
you're coming from there too.
He's gonna be like, yeah, guys. I don't know why they're complaining. We never mistreated you guys. The papacy has always treated you guys much better than you deserved.
Well, what would be amazing is I know so many people who, it's funny, like when I went to the cathedral. So I went to the cathedral in Austin for a really long time, and then we were accompanied out. Let's just put it that way. We were accompanied out because the TLM wasn't. It was banned from there. But I had all these older people that I would talk to that would go to the new mass, and they're what I call the Fox News sedes. So it's like the people who, you know,
they're the most interesting group to me.
They are. It's like everything is amazing.
Father Altman followers and they're the most interesting group to me. I don't know.
They would come up to me and we would just be talking about, you know, like the weather or something, just randomly. And they're like, "Did you see what that commie Pope did? This, that, and the other." And then I'm like waiting for Pizzaballa to be get in, because then they're gonna be like, "Oh, we got a literal Nazi in there. What are we gonna do? First a commie, now a fascist. What the heck's happening to our
and he's gonna choose Pius the 13th, and they're gonna be like, oh, they're naming him after Hitler's Pope.
Exactly.
You're such an interesting group because look, say whatever you want about the sedes, but at least they're consistent, right? Like they're very logically consistent in their thesis. It's like, okay, there's been no pope since this time, and then everything, you know. But to be like a Novus Ordo going like normie and just think Francis is like I don't know, man. It's just a strange, you know. I don't know if I think they just see the church politically, like through American politics. I think that's the only way they can see it is through the political lens.
It's so frustrating because it was one thing to see some of the Catholic commentators give like mixed feelings or whatever when Pope Francis passed. That was one thing.
Yeah.
Like not exactly excited about hearing stuff like that, but at least I'm more understanding towards it. But then you have like the QAnon tards who are out there saying like, oh, the globalist commie Pope is finally dead.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's some, you know, like whorish woman who who like literally has never had, you know, a illuminating thought in her entire life. And all she does is, you know, garner simps. That's her entire follower base. And she gets special treatment because she's a woman. And she's out there critiquing, you know, His Holiness, the successor of St. Peter. And it's like, come on, guys. We can't just pretend that these people, you know, have anything worthwhile to say about, you know, our Pope. Like we can come together to tell them.
Well,
you know,
my position on this was always, look, if any Protestant ever said something about Francis, I'd attack them because, like, you don't get to talk about my family like this. But, like, if I'm talking inside baseball with my Catholic brothers, it's like, all right, look, guys, we got a little bit of a problem over here. You know what I mean? But, like, nobody outside the family is allowed to have that conversation. That's an internal family dialogue. And
especially women, you know, especially women. Could you imagine some random woman like yelling at your dad? Like that'd be awful.
Oh, yeah.
Some broad out there, you know, yelling at your dad.
Did you hear about the theologian who sent a letter to Cardinal Farrell imploring an investigation of Pope Francis being a heretic? He quoted Pope John IV and St. Pius V. Any thoughts on that? I didn't hear about this.
I heard a little bit about this, but I answered this actually to some friends the other day. It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. I mean, basically two things. One, I actually fully agree with Christian. I was appalled at some of even my friends who, like, when Pope Francis passed away, were just like gleeful. Like, I give all credit to Christ. The first thing I did was say a prayer for him, because that's only going to be Christ.
Well, I had to force myself to. I'm not going to lie. Like, I did pray for him, but I had to like really, it was like a very conscious decision to like make. It's like, okay, he is.
It was devastating for me, because I've actually gotten into the practice of trying not to check my phone first thing in the morning, trying to like do mental prayer before I check any of the online stuff.
So true.
So I was literally preparing for prayer, out on my couch, like waiting for my coffee to get done brewing. And my wife like comes running out of the bedroom and she's like, Francis is dead. And like, I'm sitting there trying to like, get into like the proper dispositions to pray. And I just hear that. And it just like, it tore me up. Like I was,
hey, at least you got like a decent, your wife bringing you coffee and stuff. My experience was totally different. It was, I drove all night from an Institute parish back home, like a 5-hour drive, because everything in Texas is like 6 hours away. And I go to bed at like 1:30 in the morning, get 3 hours of sleep at like 4 something in the morning. I have a friend who wakes me up on a phone call, and without saying, Nick, I'm sorry for disturbing you, he's just like, I announced to you, Pope Francis has passed away. And I'm like, what the heck? But yeah, no, he's not going to be. Pope Francis is not going to be investigated for heresy or something like
so
that.
All right. So that's all right. So listen, here's what I don't think he'll be investigated either. But the thing is, we all witnessed the presidential election get robbed, right? Like we all saw that in 2020. Like we watched an assassination attempt.
I was like, what?
we've seen some wild things in the past few years, right? Like,
yeah,
really wild things we've seen. Do you think it's impossible that there's such a division inside this conclave that you get two claimants, that there's such a division in this conclave that maybe a group of cardinals break off and say, no, we're going to pick our own guy? Like there's,
whatever happens, I'm Team Tagle.
I'm just saying, we live in some very interesting times, and everything's being presented to us right now like, oh, everything, the men are so cordial and everything's that. But the thing is, there is no moderate in the eyes of a revolutionary, right? So a lot of people are saying, oh, we'll elect the moderate. But if you listen to what some of these the Francis fanboy cardinals are talking about, they're talking about, we need continuity from Francis. We cannot just act like that this didn't happen and go back to the way it was before. And it's like, this is very bizarre that these guys are now talking about continuity, when all the Catholics who lived through the revolution, when they mentioned continuity, it was like, no, because Benedict tried really hard to make a hermeneutic of continuity, where we saw a continuation of Catholicism. It wasn't a rupture. But Francis came in and kind of threw that thesis on its head a little bit. And now the revolutionaries are like, well, we need continuity with Francis. So in my mind, I look at that and it's just, those guys do not see a moderate as a possibility. There is no moderate. No. It's the revolution must continue. So if you did get a guy like we've been talking about this entire show, I don't put it past a group of left-wing crazy nuts to go and try and elect their own guy, and the German church breaks away and we get a real schism.
That's
perfectly possible. There's nothing theologically against it. I don't think it's entirely probable, but working with probabilities, anything can happen.
Yeah. I think it was Mueller actually who brought this very topic up, not like in the last week or something like that. But I don't know if he said he was talking about the German church. I think he mentioned it, but I thought about the reality of, if we were to get a Sarra in there or a Burke in there, it would not surprise me if German bishops would leave, because it's like after Pope Francis has passed, we've seen them go ahead and push forward like the full on, just, if you will, full-throated blessing of homosexuality.
It's like, when it comes to the German bishops, I can't imagine under a orthodox, pastorally conservative. That's the way I like to phrase it, rather than orthodox, because I do think Pope Francis was orthodox. A pastorally conservative, not slum priest, worker priest, man of the people, kind of like how Pope Francis was, but like a like a stickler for the rules. When it comes to one of these individuals, if they become pope, I can't imagine that many would just sit back and tolerate what the German bishops are doing. So it seems like there's going to be a schism one way or another. I can't foresee
that's what I'm saying. So look, I'm looking at it like, if you get even what they would consider a moderate or a center right guy, right? Because all of these guys are conciliar guys, like they're products of the council. I mean, Cale pointed out earlier today that the majority of the cardinals that are there today were around 20 years old when the council closed.
Mm-hmm.
Or so that means they got ordained in the old rite, and then the rite switched right up to the Novus Ordo right after their ordination around that.
Mm-hmm.
So these guys are still, they may not have participated in the council, but they are still children of the council. And they lived through that revolution. Now, I think if you got a guy who's in the mold that we've been talking about, a Sarra, an Erdő, a Pizzaballa, somebody like that, I think that there is grace that comes with the office that could be conferred upon them. And when they see the revolt from the German bishops and they see the revolt from the media, like they may pull like a real hard, just say, you know what, it's like you're not going to gain the love of the world. You may as well bring the Catholic faith fully to the people. And that's what I really pray for.
Yeah. It could come down to the situation of just, at the end of the day, and I'm not saying this to, be rude to them, but like cardinals are politicians, bishops are politicians. And so sometimes it can come down to just something like, okay, if this pope was to be in, like if a Sarra was to be in and he was just to come out, and as one of his first addresses, just like, the two great enemies of the West, Islam and homosexuality. It's like, okay, Nick doesn't really see the Germans sticking around unless there's some type of lucrative reason to stick around or political reason to stick around. That would be the only thing.
Well, they would have, because they would lose all of their financial. So like the German church, the way it operates is people get taxed right out of their like paychecks, and it goes right to the church. So if you want a Catholic burial, a Catholic funeral, even if you don't go to mass every week, like you need to pay that tax. Now, if they break away from the Catholic Church, I don't know what happens with that, but I mean,
all the German bishops just need to be arrested and thrown in prison.
Sanchez, this makes the most sense, honestly. And I agree.
Francis tried to placate them, right? And he kept them in the tent and he threw the trads out. That's essentially what he did. But I'm thinking if you get a pope that comes in, a pope that gets elected and says, we're going to throw Traditionis out and we're going to bring it back to some more Pontificum rules. Like, I really think you're going to see that side of the church blow up even more.
Zupi? Yeah. You want Zupi?
Yeah, Zupi. He's the moderate.
Have you looked into Zupi at all,
Not
Anthony?
At all. No.
It's so funny. He's kind of like he's a progressive cardinal, but so he's like Sant'Egidio. I think he's Sant'Egidio aligned. He's like he's probably a little bit further left than Francis. He's kind of like the little bit more progressive option for the Italians over Perilin. But Zupi, even though he's a super big progressive, he like celebrates the Latin Mass and he loves the Latin Mass, and he probably would like reverse. He probably would reverse the rules back to the Benedict XVI rules, which is it's really funny. We would have we'd have our. I think I saw that the German bishops did a gay, some sort of gay, I don't know, gay aligned mass of like celebration or something stupid like that. We would get like the gay aligned TLM would be.
Well, the thing is, those guys, look, some of those guys,
awful.
They are gay and they love the pageantry of it.
Right? It's like Anglicans. Yeah. The Anglicans, they're gay and they just love the liturgy.
They love the pageantry of it, right? So you even said how like the right after Francis goes, like they start bringing out all of these old these old things that, because there is something so unique. Like, okay, so I passed this video around today of like a charismatic worship thing, and I'm like, would you want to be at this? And everybody's like, half the people are like, well, as long as it's not at mass, I'm fine with it. And it's like, no, like, no, don't say that. Like, we are Catholic, and Catholics are wholly unique in our weirdness. Like, we incorporate paganism. We don't incorporate evangelical charismatic stuff. That's not what Catholics are supposed to do. Like, we need to be uniquely weird in our ritual. Like, and the thing is, that weird ritual that we do attracts people, and it attracts a lot of people. And this was part of the conversation we'll get into in the next show, because my brother-in-law, who was really not raised in much of any faith, we were talking to his mother, and his mother is a former Catholic who left the Catholic Church. She divorced his father, and now she's in a same-sex relationship. And then she went to an Episcopalian church and all over the place. But she grew up in the Revolution, and my brother-in-law was like talking about like church, and he's like, I don't know if I'm going to go to church. Like, I kind of want to go where they got incense, and like, I don't understand what's going on. And she just could not wrap her head around why we wanted this ancient ritual like that. Like, she lived through the Revolution, and she couldn't stay. She was giving me the same lines my mom gave me that we talked about with Kale the other night. And she's like, we couldn't understand anything. That mass was so stuffy. We didn't know what was going on, this and that. But I think those are just catchphrases that they were told, and that they, like, I don't think they actually thought that. They never, it's not like they, they were little kids during this thing, and they kind of heard the catchphrases of the day going around. But there's something really bizarre about Catholic ritual that attracts people, and especially the young people that are coming, and they're seeing the chaos of the modern world, and they're like, I want to go back to something stable and ancient, and they love the ritual of it.
Yeah, it's funny because I was just talking to my mother about this. My mother, she's very Protestant, definitely not a Catholic, but she told me, we had a conversation. She told me that she can really understand like why a lot of the younger people, especially with all of the disorder and dismay around us, that we are attracted to something like Catholicism. Because she's like, the way that I view Catholicism, which is really weird because a lot of people actually still view us like this. Like, the way I view Catholicism, they are like completely resistant to any sort of change. Like, they will stand up to the abortion stuff. They'll stand up to the gay marriage stuff. They'll stand up to, the contraception stuff. And they, no matter what, no matter how many people disagree with them, they'll always kind of stick with it. And people still have this view of the church, even though it's kind of funny because a lot of people within the church don't have that view of the church. There's a lot of people outside of the church that have this view of the church.
Yeah,
it's really interesting, man. We're gonna get into it on the next show because I don't want to, in case anybody ever sees this like on YouTube, but it was such an interesting conversation, and it came about because my nephew made his first communion, and I'm his godfather, and it was at a Lutheran church. So I'll get in, and I'll explain it all over there. But I don't know, man. I went and I did 3 or 4 shows on Wednesday last week, and then we had this long weekend where me and Rob didn't do anything. I couldn't wait to just get on and have this conversation tonight because it's one of the most exciting times to be Catholic. Like, you're around, like, you guys are new Catholics, and you guys get to experience a conclave pretty quickly within your conversion. And you're seeing the internal workings of the church, and you're seeing the politics. But I don't remember a conclave ever. I remember vividly Benedict's conclave. I remember Francis's conclave. I do not remember it being this contentious where people are on the edge of their seats. Like, man, we really can't get another Francis. Like, it's just what, you wouldn't have, that people would have loved the JP3 or a Benedict the 17th after either of their pontificates.
Yeah. I think part of that's due to social media, just because it's like, just think about how much media landscape has changed from 2013. Now, that's not the only reason. A lot of it has been like the confusion that you've seen in the last decade plus, but so much of it is just also people like us even just going and talking about it, because we've talked about it, like even like pre-McCarrick in 2018, that it's just the Catholic speaking circuit. That's about it, right? The Catholic Answers crowd, and some of the more independent hosts, and then kind of Marshall doing his thing. And then after 2018, and especially after COVID, everything blew up. I mean, a decade ago, any of these conversations, especially where it's just like three guys hanging out, just chatting about church politics, it's just so foreign. Because, like, let's be honest, the only popular Catholic YouTube back then, and also kind of true today, is like 5 easy steps to debunk sola scriptura, and it's just like, wow, this is the 50 billionth video.
I think people would prefer this to like the professional Catholic pundits on EWTN, and I think that the Catholic Inc., because we should probably have a conversation about them too on the other side.
Eventually.
I think we're going to have that conversation on the other side. We're going to have to do the Catholic Inc. conversation, because those guys, I think they would love to be sitting and having a conversation like this, but none of them have set themselves up to do it. You know, like they didn't put themselves in this realm where they could be honest about things. Like they're kind of in a position where they have to toe certain lines because they have donors and things like that. So they can't just have these outright honest conversations about things. So I do think we provide a unique insight into these, like what people would want to listen to as a conclave is coming up.
Yeah, for sure.
And yeah, people are saying I'm hope pilling. Yeah. Okay. So I watched.
Bro, I'm just saying, I like it. I like it compared to the other night. The other night, you were just like, Nick, you're out of your mind.
Well, so what happened was I saw Vigano's letter, and
rip.
It was just like such a black pill, and I'm like, man, I gotta figure out how I want to go into this, because first off, none of us know what's going to happen. None of us know.
Yeah.
So we could sit here and like, yeah, it's fun to speculate and it's fun to talk about this stuff and say, oh, what if, but none of us know what's actually going to happen. So I'm not going to go into this blackpilling. Like I want to go into this, and especially for the new Catholics who've never experienced what it's like to have a pope who you felt like had your back. Like I want a pope who I feel like loves his Catholic children. Like I want a pope with a father's heart, which I really it's really nice to have a conversation with Christian because now that Francis has passed, you could be a little more honest about this stuff, because I do know the difficulty that a lot of people had during the pontificate. It's like you're afraid to say certain things, and the people that did say it, people were accusing us of being cryptosetes and things like that. But there is something very different about having a pope who you feel like loves you and at least has your back. So when you're defending these difficult issues, like, you know, fighting people on the abortion issue or on the contraception issue or any of the big issues, you at least felt like the people who were in charge loved you and had your back. And even the cardinals that we see now as progressive leftist lunatics, those guys even towed the company line and would come to all the pro-life events, and they would it was a very different church 12 years ago. Very different. And it's not as different as it was from before the council, but like, you know, the pre-conciliar church and the post-conciliar church are drastically different. Don't get me wrong, but there's still a very big difference in the Benedict church and the Francis church. And I don't know what comes next. I'm just praying that whatever pope gets elected, there is grace that comes with the office. And I also do believe God has not abandoned his church.
Amen.
Like, don't believe God has abandoned this church. I do think that God still knows. And no matter what happens, even if we do get a bad pope, I'm like fully confident that it is part of the story of salvation history, and God intends for that to be what happens to us in that time.
Exactly.
So true.
Christian put out a really good video like the day after something. You were going over basically the conclave, and you had this really good line at the very end that like synthesized my feeling on things, which was, you know, God, essentially something like, God is still on the throne. I still have hope in God. It's going to be okay. That was the basic gist behind it. And I'm reminded of, and this is what I've been telling people, of the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. It's like they were about to be tossed into the flaming furnace, and they have this just epic line, right? Just think, like you think you could potentially die, but they say, our God is able to save us, and if he chooses, he will save us. And even if he doesn't save us, right, he is still God. And even though it's not as dire in my mind, my thought is no matter what happens, right, God is able to give us that which is good. And even if he doesn't, he is still good, and the Catholic Church is still true.
Absolutely.
Yeah, if nobody's watched Joshua Charles's most recent episode, or it might not be his most recent episode, but he did an episode about the church being Roman. It was 3 hours of some of the most, like, it was probably the best podcast I've heard in years. And dude, it was so good. First off, they go at the end of the episode, they talk about how the incident where the Pharisees come to Jesus about should we pay taxes to Caesar? And he's like, well, show me the coin. Whose image is on the coin? So there's a half shekel tax that the temple charges. And there's the half shekel like stops being minted by the Roman Empire. So the Pharisees go to the Roman Empire and they ask them if they can mint the coin and all this stuff. And the Roman Empire only agrees to let them mint a coin that has the image of Baal on it. So so the Pharisees were telling people you can't pay images, or you can't use the Roman coin to pay your taxes to the temple because that would be like offering idol worship, right? But really, the half shekel that they get minted has the image of an idol on it anyway. So, but the way he explained it, like he goes into it, I'm doing such a terrible job butchering it right now, but what the Pharisees were doing with the court of the Gentiles, which is the outer court of the temple where the Gentiles were supposed to be able to come and worship the God of Israel, they were implicitly denying that the covenant could be shared with the Gentiles. Like in this act that they were doing, they were implicitly denying that the covenant could be shared with the Gentiles. So all those prophecies in the Old Testament about, the Gentiles have seen a great light and all those things, like this is why Jesus goes in and he overturns the tables in the temple. It's because of the things they're doing there. But that whole podcast just goes into how when we say we're Roman Catholic, it doesn't mean Latin Catholic.
True.
It's not Latin Catholic.
True.
Especially if you're Byzantine Catholic, like the Byzantine Empire was the Roman Empire. Like there is no salvation outside the Roman Catholic Church. That doesn't mean the Latin rite. There are plenty of rites. There's 27 rites under the Roman Catholic Church.
Yeah, I was about to say, did they mention Roman being one of the marks of the church in that podcast?
Yeah, the mark of Romanness. Yeah, I've brought this up multiple times to Eastern Catholics, and for some reason they always seethe about this, but
Mm-hmm.
I guess.
Well, you have the right procedure. I've told people, I said, Christian, if he were Pope, he would do the best thing. He would go after the Bizlarpers. He'd take a bunch of scissors, cut off all their beards, force them to say the TLM. And if I was Pope, I'd make those things happen. And I'd say, I know you're married, but I'm going to ship all your wives off to convents. And I would do that too. But
I would do that too. I mean, I am very much a fan of holy celibacy. But yeah, I've brought this up with a lot of people who are Byzantine or various forms of Eastern Catholic before, and they always seem to be very sour about it. But it doesn't make any sense to me. It's like, are you pledge allegiance or pledge your fealty to the Bishop of Rome? Like what? How could this possibly be offensive to you to call you Roman Catholic? Like we have our Catholicity through our communion with the Roman Pontiff. The definition of schism, is being out of communion with the Roman Pontiff and those that are in communion with him.
Yeah.
So I cannot even conceive in my mind how one could be offended by being called a Roman Catholic.
Yeah.
Because the term is the term is first devised as an insult. Because the mark of the church is Roman, but like you have to think about the structure of the church. The church is the Pope in Rome, which was Caesar was in Rome, and then all of his governors throughout the empire, and they would govern their provinces and things like that. And that's the Pope in Rome, and all the bishops govern their provinces. Like the church is Roman in its structure, it's Roman in the way it's built. But the term Roman Catholic comes about from Protestants trying to insult us, calling us Romanists, so like the church was actually hesitant to accept the term Roman Catholic, but then eventually it did when it really started to understand, like, or work out, on paper what that actually means. And then they were like, yes, we are Roman Catholic. So Bobby said, the conflating of Latin rite with Roman Catholic is a problem in the East. I always refer to it at the Latin or Western Church to distinguish. I'm Byzantine, which means I'm explicitly Roman Catholic, but still a Bizlarper.
Yeah, he didn't. Unfortunate. I hope that you get better. I hope you get cured of your bizlarp.
Listen, I think
I was talking with one of these guys in real life, one of the bizlarpers, and I was like, you're a Roman Catholic. You're just not a Latin Catholic. And they look at me and they're like, oh yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I'm going to start using that. You could easily evangelize the bizlarpers towards
one of the biggest tweets
to shaving their beards if you just show them how they could be called Roman Catholics. Then it'll just solve all their problems.
One of the biggest tweets I ever have is I said, there's no salvation outside the Roman Catholic Church. And all the Easterners flipped out on me. I'm like, you guys just don't
quote from Blessed Pius IX.
Yeah, I always try to show them I'm like, have you heard? Do you know what the theological note is for the Mark of Romanus, right? And they're like, what's the theological note? I'm like, well, there you
go. Okay, so we're going to wrap this side up, and we are going to go over to locals, and we're going to Christian, you can leave it on your channel if you want.
Yeah, so if you want to get it for free, come over to our channel.
That's not cool. All right, you know what? We'll leave it. Oh yeah, because yeah, that's actually fine. Yeah, if you guys aren't local subscribers, you should be, because you guys are cheap, and I don't like cheapos. But you guys should definitely be local subscribers on our channel, not Christian's channel. So if you want to support the show, come over to locals. But if you are too cheap and you won't reach into your pockets, go over to Christian's channel, which is Scholastic Answers, and you can watch the rest of the show over there. Please subscribe to the Traditional Thomist. Nick's doing a bunch of nerdy stuff over on his channel.
His stuff is actually a lot less nerdy now. It's more, I think a voice crying out in the wilderness of Catholic YouTube. I like a lot of the change in content.
Yeah, I appreciate it, man. I was telling people, like, you and I, we should do a De Revelatione series, like slowly.
Yeah, that would
go through both volumes, like actually slowly but surely take our time.
I need to Ethan Dolan, my friend Ethan Dolan. He was on Pints of Aquinas actually, probably like a year and a half ago. But I need to introduce you to my friend Ethan, because we read through a lot of it together, and that was just so formative for us, because it confirmed a lot of the things that we had determined when we were struggling with Protestantism and then eventually converted.
Yeah, they're great books. I've taken 2 courses. I'm actually finishing up one more course on De Revelatione as we speak, using these textbooks. And so they're just phenomenal. I'm like, we gotta do some type of series. But the only person I know out there would be Christian, because he's like one of the only base YouTubers out there.
So, you could bring on Michael Lofton for a De Revelatione
that could be fun. That could be fun.
Well, if they don't want to make a locals account, just make a Patreon account and then become my patron.
So true.
Okay, so listen, people who are saying they don't want to create a locals account. Wait, where is that? I will say this: the conversations we have over on locals are much more personal, much. We kind of we say things. I share things I would never share on YouTube. So if it takes 2 seconds to go and start a locals account. But yeah, if you guys I'll be watching on Christian's channels that
I called you a bizlarper too. So
yeah, Christian, you're not getting any love from Christian over there, Bobby. So you better not go. All right, so we're gonna go over there. I want to tell you guys what happened to me on Saturday, and then I think we might have to have a conversation about Catholic Inc. Not just Catholic Inc. There's other people too, that the way they're handling conversations. I saw Eric Sammons called Candace Owens a total nut job because of her position on the moon landing. Then you see Jordan Peterson calling people psychopaths and all these other things because they are starting to notice things. And I think that if they don't figure out how to handle this conversation better, they're going to have a major problem, because you can't just write people off as crazy and psychopaths and nut jobs, because we've lived through a lot of events over the past 15 years, mainly the past 6 years, though, with what the government did to us, that people are starting to look at all of the narratives they've been fed for a very long time. And they're starting to question everything. And they're not going to be opposed to hearing a point of view that says, yeah, maybe we didn't land on the moon because the government lies to us about everything. The same people that killed JFK that same decade might have lied to us about landing on the moon. Maybe the narrative we heard from World War II is nonsense. They need to, if they want me to stick with these narratives that they've been giving, they're going to have to present a better story than they've given me. So we're going to talk about that on the other side. We will see you guys there Thursday night. Rob will be back. and we will talk to you guys there. Let me start removing some of these things. All right, I gotta leave. All right, I gotta take YouTube off. Right, that's YouTube. Remove.